Alright, so what we're going to do here is try to install Graphene on a vanilla installation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 8. And because we're in early 2019 here in January, Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 8 is not actually out yet. So we're running with the beta. The reason we're running with the beta as specified here in the instructions and not a more supported version like CentOS 7 or Red Hat 7 is because Graphene actually requires a number of newer versions of various different tools, specifically PHP and MySQL, which don't come out of the box easily with Red Hat 7 or CentOS 7. That's not to say that you can't install like PHP 7.1 or 7.2 on Red Hat 7, but it just requires some additional packages, or repositories rather, which is outside the scope of this installation instructions. So that's really what we've got here. That first initial note. You certainly could follow all the instructions with CentOS 7 or Red Hat 7, but for the sake of these instructions, we're going to go ahead and just assume Red Hat 8. So I'm just going to start here by pulling over these these packages that are required, and I'm going to paste them onto the screen. So let's paste those over and type in my password. There we go. So you'll notice that we're running the DNF command as opposed to yum, which you might be more familiar with if you've been using Red Hat 7 or CentOS 7 in the past. DNF is actually just an updated version of yum, really, or a rewrite of yum, a fork of yum, which ships out of the box with Red Hat 8 or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. So you don't really need to worry about that other than it's pretty much the standard package manager. We're not doing anything strange here. So it's updating all the repositories here on the left-hand side. But as soon as it's done with that, it should give me a list of all of the packages that are going to be installed as per my request. And once we see all those, we can confirm them and say yes, and we should be able to get those going. So here we go. Okay, so it's going to install 26 different packages. So there's all the packages that we specified, but there's some additional ones in there as well. So we'll just go ahead and wait as these get installed. So it looks like it's downloading them all. I should go through and step by step install them all. So once we're done with that, we're actually going to need to install Composer. We're going to let this thing run over here on the right hand or on the left hand side. Composer is a package manager for PHP. So let's open that in a new tab and we'll take a look at that. Composer is relatively straightforward to install, but it does require that you have PHP already installed. So we're going to wait on getting all those other things installed, including PHP on the left-hand side here first. But then effectively, we're just going to copy and paste this PHP, these commands right into the terminal window, and that's how we're going to get Composer installed on our machine over here in a second. So it looks like we're a little more than halfway done. So I'm going to copy these commands here and get them ready. Now, so just generally, when you install Composer, when you follow those instructions, it creates a binary called composer.far that sits right in your home directory. Later down here, when we use the Composer, sudo composer install, I'm kind of expecting that Composer is available in your path really generally, so we're going to have to do some additional steps there to make that happen, but for the most part, we're just getting Composer installed here. So let's see, we're getting pretty close. Looks like we're doing MySQL Server right now. Alright, so we're all set, and we're just going to copy and paste these Composer commands, the Composer install commands right here into the terminal window, and hit enter. And what that does here is if I do an ls, you'll notice that I've got this composer.far binary sitting right here in my home directory. But because I want that generally accessible elsewhere, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that composer.far file into the user local bin directory, and I'm going to rename it. Instead of composer.far, we're just going to call it Composer. So okay, that's all set. We've got Composer. Now we're going to need to go and check out the code from the Git repository. So let's paste these commands in here. And this is actually pulling all of the Graphene code out of Git and installing it locally. We do need to change some permissions on a couple of directories within the Graphene directory for logging and images and things like that. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, for those of you who have never used Composer, or really, I guess, any package manager, out of the box, Graphene includes all of the, yeah, see, this is what I was talking about before. So we're going to do like user local bin composer install. Oops. Yes, sorry, I forgot the sudo. Sudo user local bin composer install. Okay, I'll type in my password again. So like I was saying, out of the box, Graphene has all of the code specific to Graphene checked into the Git repository, but there's a whole bunch of additional dependencies that are required which don't come out of the box. So Composer is actually downloading and installing all of those additional dependencies inside of a directory called the vendor directory, which is why we had to run sudo there just a second ago, because that's currently owned by root, and so in order to have permissions to do that, we needed to run that with the sudo command. So it should just be downloading all of these additional dependencies, including Laravel and some other stuff. And as soon as that's done, what we're going to do, if we look over here, is we're going to create a new virtual host file for our Apache instance, which we actually installed earlier. And we're going to put that at etc httpd.conf.d and graphene.conf. So let's copy that path here for a second. And I'm going to use Nano, just because that's probably an easier editor. And you'll notice that I ran that with the sudo command because we are going to need permissions, special permissions in order to do this. But otherwise, we're just going to paste this in here, save it, and close it. You'll notice that I didn't specify a server name in here. When you're doing name-based virtual hosts with Apache, you're definitely going to want to do a server name directive, especially if you're going to have multiple instances of Graphene or even other applications being served up by the same IP address on that same server. But for the sake of this basic installation, we're going to ignore that. I'm going to start up my services. So we've got a MySQL server that we just started here, and we're also going to start the Apache server. And that should pick up the changes that we just made with our Apache virtual host directive and file there. So as soon as that's done, we're going to open up a web browser within our little Red Hat. Oh, there we go. Let's start Apache. We're going to open up a web browser here, and we're going to go to localhost. And again, because we haven't set this up with a DNS record, so we're just going to go to the localhost here. But we probably would want to, if we were doing this for real, we'd probably want to have already set up our DNS records and have an actual domain name here. So let's open up Firefox. All right, so we've got Firefox open, and as I said before, we're just going to go to http://localhost. Oops, not quite. There we go. And hopefully Apache should be up and running at this point. So our Graphene instance should respond here in a second. There we go. So it actually redirected us to setup. And so the first thing it's saying here is that it's not able to connect to the database. And that actually makes some sense because we haven't actually set up the database yet. So there's some defaults in here, and I'm actually just going to leave these more or less as the defaults. So we have the DB host. We're going to be running MySQL on the same server as the Graphene server for the time being. We'll leave the port the same. I'm just going to make the password be Graphene here. But then if we scroll down, we can see, okay, so it's telling us based on the information we specified above, we can run these commands here, and that will actually build out our database for us. So let's drag this over here just so we can get to our terminal window easily. And let's paste that command in. So this is going to connect to our MySQL server. We're going to run this create database command. We're going to create a database called Graphene. Okay, now we're going to create a new user that the Graphene application will be able to connect to the database server with. So there we go. We're creating the Graphene user, and finally, the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to actually give permission to that user to be able to do something to that Graphene database. So we got those 3 commands here, and we should be all set. Now, finally, we've actually created our database, but we haven't actually told. Graphene how to connect to the database. And so the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to copy these commands, and we're going to create a new .env file which has those in here. So we're going to do sudo nano.env, and I'm going to paste those settings right into that file. So we'll do that. And now back over here, I'm going to refresh our page, and hopefully, if all went well, Graphene will be able to connect to the database, and it will move us on to the next steps. All right, here we are. So we're back. We're back at the next page. So it's able to connect to the database, but it is telling us that no application key has been detected. So we really need to set up our application key. And while we're at it, why don't we take a look at some of these settings? App debug, the environment. We're going to go ahead and leave all these the same. But just as we did before in the previous step, we're going to copy all of these settings right from this web browser here, and we're going to put those into our .env file, being very careful not to overwrite the existing database settings. So let's save those in there, and we'll go ahead and do that again. So now we'll refresh for a second time, and hopefully, okay, so now we're back here, and it's telling us that no sites have been detected. So it was able to get past those first 2 steps, but there is no Graphene website set up. Now, it's defaulting here to localhost because that's how we're getting to it right now. Again, if we had this set up correctly previously with a proper domain name, that's probably what we would want to put in here. But for the time being, we're just going to say localhost, and we'll say RHEL8 beta is going to be the name of it. Press save. And so that's going to create the site, and now it's saying no users are detected, so I'm going to create a new user. gmail.com. I'll just make a password ABC123, ABC123. This unique ID here is really more important when you're mapping a Graphene instance to a single sign-on server. So whatever that unique ID might be, but for the time being, since we're not using SSO, we're using standard authentication, we're just going to make that something silly. So I press save here, and it actually created the site for us. You'll notice that I'm able to log in over here. My name was created. There's a couple additional pages that were created, a default group that was created. So we're now up and running with a vanilla installation of Graphene. With that said, if I hop back over to our instructions, it did tell us, okay, so we're all set. It does say here that if we want to make any changes to our PHP configuration in our php.ini file, we could do that now. But the last things I'm going to do, which are really optional configurations, is I'm going to copy these 2 commands over, because what this will let me do is every time I restart the server, it will automatically start the MySQL server and the Apache server, so I don't have to set those up separately. I don't have to start those up separately. But otherwise, we're all set and we're ready to go here. We can go in and we can start creating new widgets, new content, dragging things around, and we're all really up and ready to go here with our vanilla and initial installation of our Graphene application. So that's about it.